What's up, Steven?
What's going on, Brett? Harry?
Steven, Masa Chips in the building. Love it.
We're here. Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. We were saying, Harry and I were in the car kind of just talking through what we wanted to discuss. So this is the 1 year anniversary of us actually becoming friends in person.
Yeah, on the same weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, crazy.
Yes. So we started off, the interesting thing is the three of us started writing on Twitter right around the same time.
Yeah, February 20, well, for me it was January 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when we started writing threads, I started seeing the Tan Man account pop up more and more, and you're doing a ton of great work just teaching about seed oils and diet and some of your own health transformation. And then it's always amazing when you can take a relationship from the internet and actually connect in person. And so we met with you, your girlfriend Mia, now fiance, at Force of Nature, What Good Shall I Do conference. And now here we are, you're back in town for that.
For that exact conference tomorrow.
Yes.
That's crazy.
It's amazing how much can change in a year.
Yeah. Yeah, because we were all just like starting out on all this stuff.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been pretty wild. I remember like seeing you guys also like the first few weeks I started tweeting like the mafia icons, and I was like, who are these guys? That's so cool. And then we met and it was completely unplanned. That was funny. That was really funny.
Yeah, serendipity is a good thing. I feel like, I mean, that just showed how genuine the start of everything that we were doing was. It was like, oh, you're going to be out in Fredericksburg, Texas at this What Good Shall I Do conference too. Like, what a great place.
So random.
Yeah. And we didn't know what, I think the three of us, we didn't know what Twitter was ultimately going to turn into, but we knew that it felt really good and it was information that we wanted to share.
Yeah.
Similarly, Harry had already quit his corporate job. You were an engineer at Meta. I was working at EY in corporate jobs, and we were just figuring out what the next thing was. Masa, I don't even think Masa was a thing at that point, right?
Yeah, it was a figment of our imagination at the time, but it was not real until like a few months later, last July.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just going to ask, when did you realize the writing was going to turn into something more than just putting content out there?
That's a good question. I think I always had like ambitions to do something of an actual like business nature. I didn't know what it was going to be necessarily, but when the opportunity came, when Masa sort of just like appeared out of thin air, then it was like, okay, now we have this platform that it makes sense to like start running it off of. But it was not, I don't think it was like planned in advance. Even like the vibe and the aesthetics and everything, like that just materialized. It just like showed up sort of.
Right.
Yeah. But then I think around this time, maybe in May last year, whenever Easter was last year, that's when I first made the prototype of Masa. And so that was when I knew, okay, we're going to actually do this. Until then, it was just sort of like brainstorming, basically.
Before we get into the episode, let's talk about Fawn Bone Broth's carnivore blend.
100%. Yeah, we've been huge fans of bone broth the last few months. It's really fueled our carnivore journey. Bone broth is incredibly nourishing, especially on a carnivore, animal-based, or just any type of diet, to be honest with you. And what's great about Fawn is that they're a very simple, pure product. So their product is just boiled bones, water, salt, and most of their products have spices like turmeric, cayenne, cracked pepper, but they actually just came out with their carnivore broth, which is very simple: chicken bone broth, water, and salt too. So they're eliminating all their spices and just giving you something very pure that won't disrupt the gut.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about with the elimination diet is the fact that there's so many things that do actually affect how your body reacts to the food you put in your body. And the fact that they're just doing a pure bone broth with bones and just the minimal ingredients, I think is huge. And the carnivore audience will love this one. Fawn does regenerative bone, so it's really high quality stuff. Go check it out. Use our promo code in the link below.
Yep, code MAFIA will get you 15% off your first order. And for anyone that doesn't know, we'll get into this a lot more. Masa are these incredible tallow fried tortilla chips that you created in July of last year officially. We love the product. You sent us a bunch. Literally, I think we had 6 bags the first day. So not exactly low carb, but it was incredible.
It's not low carb. But hey, carbs are cool.
Yes.
So
and we'll get into that. But the cool part about the alternative health space is that a lot of people get into it because they've had their own journey with health. Maybe they were trying to heal something like I did. I know you had some almost like parallel health issues. So why don't we get into your story a little bit, some things that you were dealing with that kind of got you to the point where you're at today.
Yeah. Yeah. People don't really like wake up one day and just decide to get into health unless they have some reason to push them into that, which is interesting. And I think as time has gone on though, like the number of people who are sick has increased, unfortunately. But at the same time, it causes more people to like question what they're eating, how they're living, and then they get into health from that. But for me, when I was a kid, I had a whole host of issues. I don't want to overblow it. I was never like, in the hospital like for my entire childhood, but I was always like the kid getting sick all the time. I think in 8th grade, I got the swine flu when that was going around. And then 2 weeks later, I got the normal flu.
Yeah.
And it was like, that was, par for the course for me. I was always congested and I had digestive issues. I trace all of my problems back to like certain things that happened when I was like an infant or like, a baby, and I had like gut problems that then resulted in all the other things. So like seasonal allergies was a thing that I always had. Getting really bloated, not having, bad digestive comfort. I couldn't eat a lot of foods. I think since 5 years old, I didn't eat gluten because my mom identified that like I wasn't growing when I ate bread.
Wow.
So literally I'm like a 5-year-old and here I am like not growing and she's feeding me bread. And then this is like, well before gluten-free was a thing. And she took it upon herself to do an elimination diet and took everything out and put it back in and realized that the gluten was the problem. And of course, given what, I think a lot more people know now about how gluten in bread works, it's not necessarily the wheat that was the problem. Just like how everyone goes to Europe and is like, oh, I ate the bread, it was great. I felt fine. I didn't gain any weight. I lost weight. I was in France for 2 weeks, just like it's not the bread itself inherently, but the bread that I was eating as a 5-year-old in suburban America was not doing it for me. So there was always that kind of tenor to it. And I would go to friends' houses. I would get sick if we ate all the junk food. Like I couldn't eat like a normal kid or whatever. But it wasn't until college when I started cooking for myself that I realized that these issues are sort of fixable. And that was the thing that set it off for me. And that was like 9 years ago at this point.
When or what resources did you use to start to go down the rabbit hole of finding better and higher quality food? Because to me, it's probably a similar story to you. Like I've always kind of had this interest in food, but for a lot of people, like they just don't even really realize where to start. So I think that's like some useful information that people can use.
Yeah, I think the landscape now is a lot different. Totally. There's a lot more information available. It's more easily accessible. I think back then, social media wasn't as big of a deal. This was 9 years ago, so whenever that was, 2014. Social media wasn't as big of a thing. It was more like blogs. Like, I think Chris Kresser had a blog, like the paleo blogs. There was like Dr. Axe. I think he had a blog around that time. So there were a lot of blogs that I was reading about, just like Googling stuff and like learn about one thing. And then I would look at another thing and all these. And it just like went from there. So I think I started out with paleo personally. And then I also got into CrossFit back then too. And then I think the next phase for me was the fermented foods. I learned about kefir and like sauerkraut. I was making kefir like in my college apartment. Like I got kefir grains from like some random lady on the internet, and it like came in a little jar in the mail. It was like this big, maybe like 2 inches tall, and I like stuck them in milk, and then 2 days later I had kefir, and I was like, whoa, this is wild. So I was doing that. I was making kombucha in my college apartment as well. So the fermented foods were a thing, and then I think I ended up getting into sprouted foods, sprouted seeds, sprouted quinoa, all that jazz. I sprouted lentils that lasted about a week and a half until I realized that lentils are disgusting.
Yeah.
So
they're horrendous.
They're so bad.
Why were you eating lentils?
Like they don't even they don't taste good. Like they're gritty. Like even if you prepare them right, you do all the right things, it's like you eat them and they're like chalky in your mouth.
It's like total survival food.
It's total survival food. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it was not pleasant. So that lasted very briefly, and I think the next big thing for me was like the keto thing, and then a few weeks after I started keto, that evolved into carnivore. And so then I was carnivore for like 9 months, and then I stopped being carnivore for a number of reasons. I don't know if you want to get into that at some point, but then after that, I think the final format of just like eating real food. I missed the sourdough bread phase too. Sourdough bread, that was the thing.
Tell us about the sourdough bread phase.
Yeah, so that phase was, I had a studio apartment. It was like 250 square feet with like a little tiny oven that's like 1.5 feet wide. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna make bread because bread is like a traditional food. I'm like Southern Italians, like my ancestors ate this. Like this got to be good.
You're Sicilian, right?
Yeah. And so I'm like, if I'm gonna do this, I have to do it right. So I bought I bought a grain mill because I realized, okay, you have to freshly mill it yourself, you know. So I bought a grain mill and I was like, I'm going to do this like the real old school way.
In your apartment.
In my apartment. I bought a hand crank grain mill. I was like, oh, you know, when the power goes out and everyone's going to be starving, I'm going to have like bread because I like cranked the hand grain mill myself. And then I got it, so I was super excited, like bolted it to my table, and then I realized that is not an easy thing to do. I was like cranking it for like 5 minutes, and I got like a quarter of a cup of flour out of it. And then I was like, okay, back to square one. So then I bought a countertop grain mill, and that's a much better option. So I got countertop grain mill. I got my grains from like Breadtopia. They have all the like organic heritage ancient grains. Big fan of them. And then I got sourdough starter that was like powder freeze dried in the mail from this guy named Ed Wood. He has a book called Classic Sourdoughs. He was like a PhD and like went around the world and like collected sourdoughs from different countries because each culture is like slightly different. And he freeze dried them and put them in little packets that you could then resurrect like any normal sourdough starter. So I had that in line, and then I was like, all right, I'm gonna make bread. And then I started like kneading the dough and whatever, and like it was sticking to my hands. And then I'm like, oh wait, this is not like an easy thing to do. Because not only is bread making hard, this is why bakers are like a real profession. Baking freshly milled whole wheat bread is even harder because the flour is much stickier. And so I would like dust my flour with hands, trying to be like a chef. And then I would touch the bread and it would like stick to my hands. And I was like very pissed off about this, like, you know, trying to throw it and like pull my hands off quickly, like cursing at the bread. Trying to like get it to rise. Very unfamiliar with all of this. And then I baked it and it was a pancake. It was like it was a Frisbee. Like you could knock someone out with it. It was the only time I made bread that was inedible. It just didn't rise. It was like I would break my teeth if I tried to eat it. So I threw that out and then like tried doing it again, and I got better at it. Because by this point, I'd already did all the other things. Did the fermenting kombucha, the kefir, the sauerkraut, pickles, tomatoes, whatever. So like, okay, I know how to ferment things. But bread is like an actual skill. Like making bread is hard.
Yes.
Like frying onions in a pan, you know, cooking a burger is not difficult.
Anyone can do that.
Anyone can do that. Baking bread is like requires actual technique. And I would watch these YouTube videos of people making bread. I'm like, how are they doing that? It's like magic. But ultimately, I think I stopped doing that because, you know, I stopped having time on my hands. I graduated college, whatever. Like I was able to buy bread in various sources that was like up to the standards. But you know, bread's not like necessary. Anyway, so that was the phase 2. And then ultimately, okay, then there was keto, then there was carnivore. And then ultimately, I just realized that the issue is that I'm eating all these like weird foods, like going crazy, trying to like make obscure, like I sprouted broccoli seeds and whatever the heck, like quinoa. Like I'm not from Bolivia. Why should I be eating quinoa? So I realized that like we just need to eat actual food, like, which sounds easy. It's very simple. But when you realize how different food is made and prepared today compared to how it used to be, something as simple as like bread or, you know, tortilla chips or even a hamburger is not the same thing. So what's actually challenging then is figuring out how food is made correctly, basically how it used to be made, and then implementing that in the modern world. And that's not so easy. It's very simple, but it's not so easy. And I think that's where I'm not going to say I'm going to stop learning things about food. But I mean, if you think about it, it's like kind of full circle. Paleo, the philosophy of that, which I think is valid, is that you want to eat like your ancestors ate because we evolved to eat certain foods, or designed to eat in certain foods, if you will. And so insofar as we eat foods that we're not designed to eat, that's a problem. Our body can't really handle that. And so the thing about paleo, which I find to be a bit of an issue, is that there's a difference between the philosophy and the actual implementation of it. My ancestors, like, am I designed to eat Brazil nuts and like soak cashews? You know,
Why soak them when you can just remove them?
Right, exactly. Just don't eat them.
It's an interesting point.
Yeah.
But so you're interesting because and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you grew up, so health issues, you felt like you were off for a long time.
Yeah.
And in college, you're like, all right, I'm going to start self-experimenting. So you did the paleo sourdough, keto, carnivore progression.
The whole
sprouting
progression.
broccolis.
Yeah.
But you were in college though. So that's a pretty unique thing, because both Harry and I really had our health journeys after school.
Yeah.
Because college is such an unhealthy, difficult environment.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about that too.
I think I had both a blessing and a curse, which is that I was unhealthy enough to not be able to ever partake in sort of normal people life. Like if I were to go to a frat party freshman year and like drink a bunch of beers and like eat at the dining hall, I would die. Like I just wouldn't have survived. So even then, because of the way I grew up, like not eating bread, for example, or never drinking soda, like I've never had Coca-Cola. I never had Coca-Cola without alcohol in it. Basically, the first time I had Coke was like in college, and there was vodka in it. You know, so
Double whammy.
yeah,
Your body's like, what are you
not
doing
great.
to me, Steven?
But it's like I grew up with that context, you know, of like not eating the way normal people ate, because I couldn't. Like I always knew that if I pushed it too far, that you know it would be bad for me. I'd get sick. I wouldn't be able to like do my schoolwork or whatever. But I never was really that extreme about it. It was basically my mom forced me to eat X and Y.
Yeah.
And so then when I got to school, I'm like, okay, well, this is a problem. I think so. What actually happened the moment was I was doing a study abroad thing in Belgium, of all places, after freshman year, and I had to cook. And so then doing that, I'm like, okay, what am I cooking? All right, looked up recipes because I never done that before, you know, putting things in a pan, going and buying groceries. And I learned pretty quick that if I ate different things, I would feel different. And so I think the first thing for me personally was I cut out rice, paleo, once again. And then I could breathe through my nose for the first time in my life. And then I was like, whoa, if I can breathe through my nose now, you know, just by doing this one thing in my diet, what else can I do? What other problems can I fix? And that really triggered the rest of the rabbit hole. But yeah, when I went back to school after that experience, like there's no going back, you know? So even still, I mean, I would go to parties and, you know, if there were drinks, I would have something like I would have tequila with ice or something, or like seltzer, and it's gross. But like, that's what I would drink, or I wouldn't drink that much. And if I went to the dining hall, for example, I wouldn't eat the normal food. I would have to like go back to the guy in the dining hall who makes like the special food for like the kids with food allergies. And I would just like get him to make me chicken breast, and like, that's it. And then I would also, once I had my own apartment, I would bring like the bread I made, or I would literally bring my sprouted quinoa that I cooked with olive oil to the dining hall, and then get the chicken breast and then eat that. So there was never, I never had the luxury of being able to just like eat whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
I had friends in school too that were like, what are you doing, man? Why are you like going through all this effort? Because they would like get Popeyes at 3 a.m. and just like drink a lot. And like it's not great, but they were fine.
Yes, they had resilience. You didn't have resilience.
I did not have the resilience that they did. So I was kind of forced into this path, basically. But yeah, college was fine, especially once I got my own apartment and then I could cook. And that was easier.
Steven, can we press into the idea of the preparation aspect of all this? Because I think it's a really important point that is missed on people who are just starting off on their health journey. It's like sourdough bread versus regular bread.
Sure.
There's a difference, right?
Yeah,
like maybe just break down like how preparation plays a role in how your body is going to interact with the food you're putting in your body.
Sure. So, that's a whole topic.
Let's dig in.
So yeah, I think for bread specifically, starting off, food, just because it has the same name as another example of that food does not make it the same thing. Basically, not all bread is created equal. This bread is different from that bread. The problem is that humans, because we think in words, when we start to apply a word to something, we start to implicitly assume that all things which have that word ascribed to it are the same. So
we're just like constantly looking for ways to dumb things down.
Yeah, exactly. Because the world's super complicated. And so we need ways to like break down the complexity of the world in ways which we can understand. So milk is a good example. Like not even, completely ignoring like the oat milks and the almond milks, just milk itself. Like that farm is different from that farm, and that processor is different from that processor. And, that cow is different from that cow.
Yes.
Like and this one cow on this day is different from the same cow on a different day.
Yes.
Obviously some of these differences are bigger and more important than other differences. Like the same cow on 2 different days is like, it's the same. Close enough. Not enough to make a difference. But different farms in different states with different cows fed different diets, like these things can make a huge difference. And an example of this is like milk in the 1800s in New York. And this is like the whole lecture about how, why raw milk is illegal. But they were feeding the cows basically like garbage, a combination of garbage and like the waste from like whiskey distillation and like the whiskey distilleries in Brooklyn.
Swill milk,
exactly. And the milk that was produced had like an off smell, an off color. It wasn't white. They would add like flowers and pigments and like weird like things to make it look whiter. And they would feed it to babies, and a lot of babies died. Like 8,000 babies in New York like died in one summer because of this like crappy milk. And so it's still milk, right? If you use the human dumbed down version of thinking, like, oh, it's milk. Why did that milk kill someone? That milk did? Well, it's not the same thing. But we're not in the habit of like applying different words to like different versions of the same thing, even when they're so distinct. As for one of them, you know, in one example of milk, it's like a very nutritious food that I'm sure everyone listening is relatively familiar with. And then the other example, it's like literally toxic and kills people. Like those are two different substances, and yet we call them milk. So that kind of is a little story to illustrate the importance of these distinctions between methods of food preparation. So it depends on whatever food you have or whatever category of food you have. Those preparations are going to be different. So let's take a few examples, like seeds, for example. Whether it's a grain like corn or bread or wheat, for bread, or whether it's like a nut or a legume or something, they have a lot of anti-nutrients, which I'm sure people are familiar with: phytic acid, lectins, blah, blah, blah. And the way that those foods are prepared in traditional cultures, insofar as they were eaten at all, are often very intensive because the anti-nutrients in seeds are pretty toxic. And so for seeds, you can like soak them and sprout them, which basically says, because seeds are dormant, right? They're like an egg waiting to be fertilized, but they don't go bad. Seeds can be kept in your counter for, months, years, whatever. And then when you put them in the ground, because they're seeds and the water falls on them, then they start to grow. So what you're doing when you're soaking and sprouting a seed is you're tricking it into thinking that it's been planted. So it starts to grow. And then all the nutrients that were like kept unavailable for like in preparation for the seed to germinate, those nutrients are then unlocked once it starts to grow. And so that's why people like sprout and soak things. For bread, people, it's the same thing that applies to wheat, but instead of soaking it and sprouting it, people fermented it using sourdough fermentation, which is like bacteria and yeast, like go to work. And they do a similar process to what you might have obtained if you soaked it and sprouted it. And so that's an important thing for seeds. Something like potatoes, you got to cook them, right? Root vegetables, you got to cook them. If you eat certain root vegetables like sweet potatoes or like yucca, for example, if you eat it raw, like you'll die. It's poisonous. So, I mean, it's very basic. It's just cooking, but like that's very important to make those things edible. And so the list goes on and on of these different methods of just the preparation. But then if you want to take it one step back, like how did you even get to the point where you're preparing it? Like it had to be grown. And so growing methods are different too. The way modern wheat is grown, it's especially in the US, it's like sprayed with glyphosate, of course, while it's growing. And then they'll say, oh, the rain washes off the glyphosate when they harvest. Okay, cool. Then a lot of farmers also spray another round of glyphosate after, like right before harvest, because it dehydrates the plant and makes it easier to thresh. So like the actual wheat berries have to be separated from the straw. And that's easier to do after it's been sprayed with glyphosate again. Yeah. And so now you have pesticide covered wheat. And then, okay, that's that segment of the process. And then so what about even before you start planting it? What about the strain? What about the actual variety of the thing itself? The modern versions of wheat, especially once again grown in the US, are hybridized and like, selectively bred to contain higher amounts of gluten than they would have had in their ancestral counterparts. And gluten is maybe fine in small doses, but if there's a ton of it, then now this is an issue because it's like not something that we ever sort of grew up with, like in an evolutionary sense. And then what about the soil? You put the wheat in the soil could be toxic because it has pesticides in it. It could be depleted of micronutrients, right? Everyone's always talking about, oh, there's selenium in Brazil nuts, or there's magnesium in this thing, or like, where do you think those things get into the plant from? Like they're in the soil. Like, yes, the carbon and the nitrogen, whatever, like you get these from the air, or like the nitrogen sequestration like happens from the bacteria in the soil and whatnot. But the minerals, like the rare earth minerals, especially like the micro minerals, like those things are in the soil. The plants grow, you harvest the plants, and those minerals are gone. How are they getting back in? Yeah. So the soil quality is like a thing. And if you start to chain all these things together, from like the species of the plant to like the soil, to the way it's grown with the pesticides or lack thereof, and then it's harvested, and then the preparation of it with the sourdough or the soaking or the sprouting or whatever. If you start to chain all these things together, you start to see how big the difference really is, because at every stage in like the chain, let's like imagine a little tree here, and at each step you can have, good soil, bad soil. good wheat, bad wheat, whatever. There's so many different little branches.
Totally.
And so if you're all the way on one side versus all the way on the other side, that's like an entirely separate thing. But once again, we still call it bread or milk or whatever.
Or food. And it's not food.
Or food. Yeah. Or food. Exactly. And so it might sound nitpicky to like obsess over all these minor differences, but like it's not even that one difference alone is going to make or break the thing. It's all of them together. And if you have, you know, one version or another version that are like diametrically opposed, like that makes a big difference. So I'm not going to eat like normal hamburger buns, but I'll eat the sourdough bread or whatever made in the sort of way that I've kind of hinted at.
Yeah, your framework on food preparation is so good and so in line with how we think. One of the things that Harry and I just continually bring up, like, you know, nutrition and getting in shape and getting your health in order, it can be so overcomplicated. And one of the things that we say is like, if you can just start cooking your own meals and controlling your inputs, your oils, your fats, it's such a good spot to be in. And you'll see like 80% of the progress just from that. It's something I learned from your Substack. I'd actually never thought about this nutritional framework before. I think you said something along the lines of the preparation of your food makes the poison. And you broke down the concept of a French fry. Maybe we could dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, that's another good example of this like preparation chain. And I think the idea to take away here is like, there is no bad food. There's just bad ways of making it. So, you know, perfect example, French fry, the pinnacle of junk food in like the American consciousness, right? Oh, fries at McDonald's, junk food. Well, is it? You know, when you have seed oils that are high in PUFAs, which are highly inflammatory, as everyone is familiar with, that are grown with pesticides that make their way into the oils, that make their way into the food. And then you use them to fry like pesticide-covered potatoes, right? Now you have a junk food. That's how you make a junk food. Once again, like junk food is a category. It's not so simple. You know, just because a French fry sometimes happens to be in the junk food category, that doesn't mean another French fry has to also be in the same category. Two different French fries, two different, like, once again, two different foods. So you have crappy French fries, for lack of a better term, calling that junk food for sure. But imagine a version of a French fry where instead of pesticide-ridden inflammatory seed oils, you have regeneratively raised grass-fed beef tallow, which is full of saturated fat, very low in PUFAs, and very high in micronutrients like vitamin A and vitamin K2. And you use that to fry an organic potato, which even better has been fermented. Like same thing like making a pickle. You ferment it for like a day or two in salt water. The bacteria start to grow. They break down some of the anti-nutrients that are also in potatoes. McDonald's used to do this too, actually. They would, and I think they still might, they soak their French fries in vinegar before they cook them. And that imparts, you know, a benefit in the cooking and the taste of it. But whenever you soak anything in vinegar, it's always a mimicry of actually fermenting that thing. So there's another brief digression, but like take pickles. Everyone thinks a pickle is like a cucumber soaked in vinegar. No, a pickle is a cucumber soaked in salt water, kept at like a cool temperature, at which allows the bacteria that are already present in the pickle to sort of grow and thrive. And those bacteria break down some of the harder to digest elements in the fiber of the cucumber. And that thing, or that breaking down process, produces the lactic acid, which tastes sour. And that's why you have a pickle.
Interesting.
So the cheapo, you know, processed version of a pickle is literally just soaking it in vinegar. It like mimics the taste. It's sour, it's crunchy, whatever, but it doesn't actually have the microbiological process that like got you to a pickle and the nutritional benefits associated with it. Like cucumbers, I actually had cucumbers for lunch today. They were in a thing that I got, and I'm like burping up cucumber flavor. And it's like cucumbers alone, like there's a thing, I think they're called cucurbitacins, I believe, if I'm saying that right. They're also in watermelons, because cucumbers and watermelons are the same family. And that's like another one of these plant anti-nutrients. And so the activity of the bacteria during fermentation breaks down a lot of these things and makes them more digestible. And so pickles are great. I can eat pickles, but like real pickles, not vinegar-soaked cucumbers, which are, once again, oh, they're pickles. No, there's vinegar-soaked cucumbers, and then there's actually fermented pickles.
Let's take a minute to talk about some of the sponsors and brands who support the show.
Who are you thinking?
I was thinking about Carnivore Bar. What are your thoughts on Carnivore Bar?
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable product. We were lucky enough to have the founder, Philip Meese, on the show a few months ago, and he was able to send us a bunch of product when we started the relationship and absolutely loved it. I mean, you know, it's minimum ingredient product, beef, tallow, salt, and then they do have a honey flavored option as well, but it's so nice to have a bar that's like 3 to 4 ingredients. And like when you're following a carnivore diet, it's really tough to find products that are in line with that specific diet, you know?
Yeah, for me, it kind of hits like the holy trinity of what you're looking for when you're looking for food. So it's nutrient dense, it's convenient, and it tastes great. And as you said, most people who are trying to eat healthy, the convenience factor is kind of a tough part. So just being able to have something you can grab on the go, know that you're going to have that nutrition for the day, it's huge.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough, we got to actually see their factory too in Missouri, and they're just doing things the right way. I love how they offer an option for like carnivore purists where it's just beef, tallow, salt. And then they also have an animal-based option too. If you do want a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of variety, they have the honey in that option. And they're just people that are doing things the right way. They're very mission focused. They're carnivores themselves. And, you know, we're always on the go. We're traveling. We've taken a bunch of flights together. To have a bar that has 30 grams of fat too, like that's huge from an energy density standpoint, right?
Yeah, he checks all the boxes, or the company checks all the boxes. And I just think the fact that they're sourcing from a regenerative farm as well, and Joyce Farms, just a win-win.
100%. So carnivore bar. So we got the affiliate link, and then it's code MAFIA for 10% off.
One of the other farms that supports us is Perennial Pastures, another regenerative farm out of San Diego. Our experience with Kevin Munoz, the owner, we had him on the show, a young first-generation rancher who's really empowered by this movement of regenerative agriculture and really wants to be a leader in the space. I think our conversation with him was so insightful just in terms of how mission-focused he is and how he really thinks about his farm as a business and wanting it to be here 50, 100 years down the road, even though he's just the first generation of it. And I think just being able to spend time with him out in San Diego was kind of the perfect indication of that, where we got to go have a meal with him at his house, hang out with his wife and kids. Like, what an amazing person. And I think his mission focus around raising really high quality beef and restoring nutrients to the soil is just one of those rare missions that I think everyone can get around.
Yeah, he has such a commitment to really feeding the local community in San Diego, in the San Diego County first and foremost, but he's also passionate about feeding the community around the country. So I know they've invested a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to being able to order beef in bulk on their website. So I know that they now offer quarter, half, whole cows directly off the website. They have that great ancestral blend ground beef product. So it actually has organ grinds mixed into the ground beef. So you're getting the benefits of like an ounce or so of organ meat, but because it's in the ground beef, you really can't taste it at all. And I think to your point, Harry, just another amazing person. You know, Kev was someone that he was following a paleo diet in college and started realizing, wow, when I nourish my body with real foods, I feel amazing. Had a really successful stint in tech, but realized that there was just something else that he was passionate about. So he's one of those rare cases where, you know, he put his money where his mouth is, and he's a first generation farmer, just, you know, bootstrapping this thing, raising money, and just so passionate about feeding the community. Just an amazing guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening. Now we're going to go back to the show.
I didn't know that. Did you know that?
No, I have no
Getting
idea.
killed today.
So I bring Steven on the show. Teach us something.
Yeah. There's a lot of these fun tricks. So I'm just guessing that like the reason McDonald's soaks their potatoes in vinegar is to mimic the process of fermentation that would happen naturally with salt water, and the bacteria produce that lactic acid. They're lactic acid bacteria. That's why they're called lactobacillus. Like the lactic acid is a thing there. And so people like Bill Schindler, if you're familiar with him.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we've had him on. Amazing guy.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he ferments his potatoes first before cooking them. But it's not soaked in vinegar. He ferments them with salt water. And then you cook them. So imagine, okay, you did the organic potato, you cut it correctly, you soaked it in salt water, fermented it, and then you fried it in your regeneratively raised, nutrient-dense grass-fed beef tallow. Now you have a health food. And so you had, on one hand, you had junk food, and now you have a health food. And that's mind-blowing, I think, to people who mostly associate, in the contemporary American culture, most people associate junk food with tasting good, but being bad for you. And they associate health food with tasting bad, but being good for you. And so there's like these two categories of foods. And when people go to a meal, they're like, oh, I'm eating junk food right now because it feels good and I want it. And, you know, I worked hard this week, so I earned my junk food. And then there's other people who are, and they're the same person or whatever, like at lunch, you know, on a Wednesday, it's like, okay, it's the middle of the week, I need to eat health food. So then they're going to be eating their like bad tasting like kale and chia seeds and whatever it is. And so they have this framework where they're flipping from junk food to healthy food. And that's very like psychologically toxic to people because it means like it will prevent them from ever actually being able to stick to any sort of lifestyle that's healthy,
Right.
because they don't want to give up their notion of like enjoyability. And this is a huge problem, because if you extrapolate from what we've just been talking about, you don't necessarily have to have bad tasting health food.
Yes.
Definitely.
The French fry that I just described, the sourdough bread that we described, and there's a million more examples that we could go on in this way. Those examples testify to the fact that healthy foods taste good.
Yes, that's one of the things that we talked about. We just had, I know what you're going to talk about too. We just had Mark Sisson on last week, which was incredible. He's been a top guest for us, and one of the things that I think surprises people about him is he literally said on the show, he goes, I want to live a life where I enjoy every single bite of food that tastes delicious and is actually good for me too. That's possible.
Right.
So I feel like when I look at your Twitter and your Instagram with you and your fiance, Mia, shout out Olive Oil Queen, who I need to separately have her on the podcast. But I feel like you both enjoy your meals. They're delicious. They're satiating, but they're also good for you. And I know you said you have a very simple approach, even though it's simple, but it's not easy. So maybe we can dig into some of those foods and how you think about being healthy, but also like eating delicious meals and enjoying your life too.
It's definitely where the rubber meets the road. It's like, how can we make these foods that are perceived as junk healthy?
Yeah, and that's where victory will actually be achieved in this whole space, because a lot of people who want to be healthy and have this view that like health foods are distinct from junk foods will, through sheer force of will and self-deprivation, like stick to a lifestyle that is quote unquote healthy, but they hate. And they wake up every day and they're like kind of miserable, but they have a high amount of willpower. They have a strong degree of self-restraint, and they might succeed at doing this for, some amount of time, maybe even years, as some people have. But then there's the 95% of the normal rest of us. I'm not necessarily that. I'm pretty extreme. But 95% of everyone else, at least, that looks at those people and are like, okay, well, why even be alive?
Yeah.
Every bite of food you take, which is like one of our primary human functions, eating, every bite of food you take, you're miserable. Why is that even a life worth living? And I used to think that those people were just like, oh, you have bad willpower, like go be fat, But I realized they're right. They're actually correct. The problem is that people didn't, like we, collectively didn't have a good answer to that, other than like, no, just don't enjoy your life, because I'd rather live to be like super old age. Well, and they'll say, well, why would I want to be in old age? Like, why would I want to live 80 years of misery, And then there's no good rebuttal to that.
Yes.
Like, they're absolutely correct. And so the answer, of course, is to overcome this like false dichotomy of like junk food and health food, and realize that there are healthy foods. In fact, all of the healthy foods, if you want to take it one step further, actually are delicious. And so when I eat my healthy food, and that's what I talk about on my Substack, on Instagram, whatever, that's the entire message here, is that I'm not actually depriving myself. I eat everything I want, nothing that I don't want, and it's amazing. And probably even more enjoyable and better than the junk food that everyone else eats.
Absolutely.
And it's funny, this is actually how Masa Chips came to be. Because I was at a New Year's sort of get-together with my friends in Miami, and this was a year and a half ago about, so 2022, and one of them had ordered like Uber Eats tacos, and it's like in Miami the tacos are good, and it had come with tortilla chips, and of course they're fresh, freshly cooked in seed oils, delicious, golden crispy canola colored brownish color. And I'm just like staring across him at the table, and he's just like stuffing his face, and I'm like, that's disgusting. Why would you do that? And he's like, what do you mean? They're delicious. And I'm like, no, it's not that. Like, they're covered in seed oils. Like, don't you know what seed oils? Like, haven't you like been on the internet? And he's like, well, yeah, but they're delicious. Like, I don't want to be like you and eat like miserable food all the time. Like, I'd rather just eat these things. The exact like hypothetical discussion we just mentioned, that happened. And I was like, you don't understand. I don't eat gross foods. I enjoy what I eat, and I don't eat anything that I don't enjoy. It's just that those tortilla chips are cooked miserably and horrifically, and they're not even as good as they could be. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And then I start describing, the ideal form of tortilla chip, which is, of course, organic corn, naturally nixtamalized, right? We talked about the grain preparation process for corn. Instead of sourdough or soaking, you do a thing where you boil corn with crushed up limestone, which is mostly calcium hydroxide. And if anyone's ever eaten corn on the cob and then like checked the toilet like 12 hours later, they've seen the corn shells, like the corn, not the kernels, but like the little cellulose shell, that you see that in the toilet because you can't digest that kind of fiber. Like humans can't digest it. So the corn has these shells. And then to get rid of this, like the Aztecs basically invented this process where you boil the corn with crushed up limestone. It dissolves those shells, and it kills a bunch of mycotoxins, or gets rid of a bunch of mycotoxins, kills the mold that's on it, makes certain nutrients bioavailable. I believe it's B1 or B3, one of the two. Magnesium is more bioavailable. And then you drain the corn, you crush it up, you grind it up, and then now you have tortillas. So like people don't necessarily know this, but like there's like tortillas are not made from corn flour. They're made from corn that has been nixtamalized and then ground up, which is distinct because if you try to put water and corn flour together, it won't hold. Like it won't stick together. You can't make a tortilla out of it. It literally doesn't work. It won't even taste the same. So you have corn like that, which once again, this is an example of these sort of traditional processes that like the tribes of old, invented to make their food digestible. And then you take that and you fry it in your nutrient-dense grass-fed beef tallow, and then you sprinkle your little, clean, Redmond salt or whatever salt you want. And then that's like the ideal tortilla chip. And so I was like telling him about this. And the only reason I knew about tallow frying anyway, because going back full circle again, when I studied in Belgium, they fried their French fries in tallow, twice fried in tallow. And that's why Belgian fries are the best in the world. So I'd known about that just from way back because I was like there and like eating French fries for an entire summer. And so I
dipping them in mayonnaise.
I did back then.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Hey, it's good.
It is good, but canola oil mayonnaise.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah, I don't
Does
think.
Belgium use canola oil mayonnaise, you think?
So mayonnaise is interesting. It was actually, people think it's like this old food, but it's not. It was invented in the 1800s as like in France as like a condiment with like vegetable oils. Maybe even later than that, but it's very recent. It's not like a super traditional recipe, unlike hollandaise sauce or other similar types of sauces. So it only really became popular back then, which is in food history, like recent, that was yesterday.
Super recent.
And so mayo has never really been good.
Interesting.
Obviously, if you use a good oil, you can make mayo good, but that's like, it's weird. It's like we're using older methods than methods that are even older than when mayo was invented. So, I mean, if I were to make mayo, I'd probably use duck fat because it's like mostly liquid at room temperature. But whatever, I digress. Anyway, fries and mayo is amazing. Yeah. Anyway, so I knew about that. I was describing the tortilla chip hypothetical recipe, and then he was like, well, why don't you make them? And I'm like, maybe I should. And then that was literally January 5th or whenever that was. That was like the origin of like the Masa chips idea. And that's just like another example of like how you can make one food well, and then you can make the quote unquote same food badly. And if you take the former course of action, it's a good health food. And if you take the latter course of action, it's a junk food.
Totally.
And so yeah, I think getting back to the question here is like, yeah, we don't dislike anything that we eat. Like I'll give examples. Like for breakfast, it's pasture raised eggs, with usually Mia melts some raw cheddar on top of them, salt. The sourdough toast with organic, freshly milled, ancient grains, all the check boxes on the bread.
Yeah.
Raw grass-fed butter from the Amish. And then we have some kind of like pasture-raised sausage, or it's usually sausage. Sometimes it's pork, sometimes it's lamb. And then maybe a spoonful of raw honey, glass of raw milk with it. And yeah, that's delicious. Yeah.
I think the next big diet trend is just going to be called the Amish diet because they've got it right.
Yeah.
They've got it right.
Yeah. And it's like they're the example because they're the only people today in America that grow and produce food as was done 200 years ago. It's nothing unique about them. If any of our, families had preserved the way that we grew food for, the 5 generations since like before the Industrial Revolution, we would be eating the same way. And so, yeah, the Amish diet, that's exactly right. That's like the real food diet. You don't cut anything. You don't cut large swaths of categories of food out. You're not importing weird things from like all 4 corners of the world and pretending it's like sustainable. You're eating like food from the land that we live on, grown as it's meant to be grown.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's breakfast and that's like delicious. Like, but if you go to Denny's and you get something similar, then it's junk food. Because they're like feedlot chicken eggs full of soy and seed oils, and you got like pesticide ridden, like yeast risen toast. that will make anyone's, let alone people with like gluten sensitivity or whatever, will make anyone's gut complain.
Yes. I'm also smiling right now because I'm imagining Harry writing a book called The Amish Diet.
I think you should.
It's gonna come out 2024.
I call this, I personally call the version of this the decadent diet,
Oh, I like
I
that.
like that.
because
That can be the sequel
Yeah.
to the Amish diet.
yeah, well, it's funny because like there's two ideas there. Like the Amish diet is like the traditional idea,
Right.
like it's just grown, over generations the way it was done.
It's a little boring.
Yeah, it's basic. But like the decadent diet is like understanding that the most luxurious foods, or many of the most luxurious foods throughout history, are that way because of their nutritional qualities, and that's why they're so sought after.
Yeah.
For example, caviar is like a fun one. Like it's a health food. It's so expensive. Well, yeah, because people, at least in the past, recognize that they should pay more money for nutrients. Or like a dessert with, raw milk and like honey or maple syrup or whatever. Plenty of desserts, like even ice cream, whatever, like this. That's a decadent food. It's like rich and like luxurious and delicious, and it's health food, So there's this idea here, which carries on to, like, very interestingly maps onto the rest of health in general, which is that like luxury and health often coincide, especially in the modern world. For example, when we talk about clothing, right? I know that's like a thing nowadays. The clothing materials that are good for you, insofar as they're not plastic that's dissolving into your skin and disrupting your hormones or whatever, those clothing materials are exactly the materials you'll find at like most of the most expensive fashion houses today.
Mm-hmm.
Like leather, suede, cashmere, silk, wool. These fabrics, if you go to like an expensive fashion store, that's what you'll find. And those are also the fabrics that aren't like poisoning you. So there's this like very interesting overlap here. Like same thing with like water. Everyone used to make fun of, I remember 10 years ago, the kids with the Voss water, right? But they were in glass bottles,
Yeah.
And like now here we are with our glass bottled water, but it's like our healthy water.
Yes.
But it's like there's that overlap, which is very interesting.
I keep coming back to this idea of like your food is trying to speak to you when you're talking. When people put food that's not prepared properly, it's going through all these bad processes, and it's considered the junk food version of the food.
Yeah.
And then their body responds negatively to it.
Yeah.
And they ignore it, and then they get caught in that pattern, that paradigm of just like eating garbage. That's when you kind of get trapped into thinking that like there's no real alternative.
Yeah.
But when you start eating food that's prepared properly and like not really thinking about food in this limiting factor, like, oh, like that's, like a healthy alternative, like it can't taste good. You don't give yourself a chance to actually let food like speak the language it wants to speak to you, which is like, it's supposed to nourish you. It's supposed to make you feel good. It's not supposed to make you feel like crap.
Right.
Anything that's you're putting in your body that makes you feel like crap is probably not food.
Not good. Not good. And people get so used to that then like, or like a normal person who eats seed oils constantly, if they go and eat seed oils, like an incremental seed oil won't actually make them feel that bad because they already feel like their entire standard of life is like so in the dirt.
Energy depleted.
Yeah, it's so in the dirt that it's like
might
they
feel
don't
better.
even notice the difference. But like if I eat seed oils, I'll notice it.
Yes.
And there's a whole discussion that it might be worth having about sensitivity when it comes to health, and something that me and I have talked a lot about is when you get healthier, you start becoming sensitive in like the sense of like being attuned, like finely attuned to everything. The food that I eat, how it feels, how it tastes. Like she can distinguish between like how many different types of olive oil. Like I can just smell a glass of water at a restaurant and I'll know if it's tap water. I remember in college at one point, my friends were like giving me crap for always having my filtered water with me or something. And they're like, you can't, it's not even different. And I was like, what do you mean? You can literally taste the difference. And they're like, no, you can't. It's just water. Once again, it's just water. Like, no. So I had them like basically give me a blind test of like 3 different versions of water. One was tap water, one was Brita filtered water, and one was like my water bottle water, which at the time was a Berkey filter with a fluoride attachment on it. And they had me like tell which one was which, and I didn't even have to drink it. I literally just smelled one of them, and I was like, "Oh, that's tap water." And they're like, "Yeah, you're right." But that's not something that they would have been able to do.
Yes.
Because they're attuned, like they're so clogged up. Basically, they're unable to observe and like discriminate between these minute differences. And I chalk that up to them. Like when your body is so overwhelmed with like all this garbage. Like humans are a sensory animal, right?
Yes.
Everything we get, 5 senses, we perceive everything. So that's like if that's one of our core functions, when we're full of garbage, like those functions are less specific. It's like looking through foggy glasses or something.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to people that are unhealthy. Like they can't even evaluate how they feel because they don't know how they feel.
Yes.
Like their powers of self-perception are so weak, or their powers of taste are so weak. Or like feeling, like I can feel fabrics and I know if there's plastic in it. Like I can feel at a store, I can feel a shirt and be like, oh no, that's like, got polyester or something. Taste, right? We already said it. Taste the water, smell the water, the fragrances. People don't even notice the fragrances. And I'm over here like basically like breathing in my shirt in an Uber because the guy has like these air fresheners.
Right.
When you were in New York, right?
Yeah.
I remember you
Well,
posted
anywhere in
about that.
Ubers are rough. And like, so this trip is the first one where we actually preemptively messaged the Airbnb host to like not use fragrances in the space. And like when they wash the sheets to use like fragrance-free detergent. And we have 2 more Airbnbs because we're, going to the conference and coming back to Austin. But so far so good. No fragrances.
love
But
it.
like the last Airbnb I stayed in, I was like suffocating the entire time. And this is like a thing that people who are not finely attuned, people who are unhealthy, they don't even notice this.
Yes.
And so one of the goals here, and I think one of the values here is like once people start to wake up, like Harry, like you said, they start to notice the difference. They start to eat food that's like actually prepared well and actually makes them feel good. They'll start to notice these things everywhere. They'll start to question, well, why do my hands feel weird when I touch a receipt? Or like the steering wheel in the rental car is made of like pleather. And I'm like, my hands, like, it's like gross on my hands. And like I have a Jeep and the steering wheel is leather and it's like, it feels great driving it around, even like touching something as seemingly innocuous as a steering wheel has implications that like you get to see the more refined your senses become. And I mean, basically, if you want to think about it, it's like an ocean, right? With the waves, and there's like all these different levels of waves with all these different amplitudes. There's the big waves and the little waves and like little ripples and the tiny little ripples on top of that. And so, and I think people who talk about meditation will talk about something similar. At least the metaphor is similar, where you start removing the bigger waves, and then you continue to remove waves of decreasing size until all that's left is like a still pool. And if you have a still pool and you just like flick it, it completely shatters and you can see it. But if you like flick the ocean, you can't see that.
Yes.
So if something as innocuous as like the plastic on a steering wheel of a rental car is like a tiny little drop of water, in the ripples that it makes, if you're in the ocean, you can't see that at all. So people won't even notice that. And I think the food, of course, because we are what we eat, literally, cliched as it is, like every molecule in your body that's part of your cells comes from food that you put in your mouth and chewed and digested, every single molecule, or, food that your mom ate when she was pregnant with you. That's the most fundamental thing. So I think it always starts there.
Yes.
But health is, way beyond the food. But yeah, I don't know if that, I forget what the question was.
You actually, no, I actually, you actually segued perfectly because I wanted to ask you about this. You're talking about how attuned you are, how attuned me is to the not just the food you're eating, the oils you're cooking with, the clothing that you're putting on your skin, the Airbnbs that you're staying in. A few months ago on Twitter, you had published that you'd created this seed oil sensitivity card, which I think is the.
Wait, that's so ironic. I didn't even realize that I called it seed oil sensitivity.
Yeah.
Wait, that's so funny.
And for someone that doesn't know what that is,
Yeah.
it's such a pain in the ass to go out to a restaurant and try and explain to a waiter or waitress that you're sensitive to seed oils. Don't cook it in seed oils. A lot of times they might even think that they're cooking with butter, but it's like a butter laced mixture with some type of seed oil. So you were like, I'm going to make this really simple. I'm going to create a little index card that you can go out with.
Yeah.
And it basically says, hey, I'm sensitive to these 8 oils. Please don't cook with them.
Yeah.
And I think you gave the preferred cooking source.
Yeah.
But it got it went viral because it got a ton of really positive feedback of people that were like, this is awesome. I need 1,000 of these. And then there were other people that got really triggered by it and got really negative.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what your thought process was with that and what you think that means about where we are in terms of just health and nutrition.
Yeah, so the seed oil sensitivity thing, I think a lot of people misunderstood the propaganda here. So maybe we can set the record straight about it. Because one of the main criticisms, it was weird. Like, yeah, there's the people who don't care about health, and so they'll criticize it or whatever. Like, oh, this is annoying for the waiters and the chefs. And like, okay, fine, whatever. But the people who are ostensibly on our side, there was also a lot of criticism from them, which was like, basically along the lines of like, why are you saying it's a sensitivity? Why are you saying this? Like, just tell them you don't want seed oils. Like, don't beat around the bush, this kind of thing. I thought it was interesting because like if you go to a party and you tell someone, or, you go out to dinner and you say like, no, I don't want that food, I don't like it, you'll offend someone. Like, let's say it's your aunt's holiday party for something. You say no, it's like, it's offensive. Mm-hmm. People want you to eat the food that they're providing for you. It's like a very fundamental evolution, like human hospitality thing. If you don't want to eat the food, you're like, you're a foreigner or whatever. You're not part of the tribe. So it's offensive. And so people be like, what do you mean you don't want it? Like, you don't like it? Blah, blah,
Right.
But if you say, oh no, I can't eat that, I'm allergic, it's the opposite reaction. All of a sudden, the same person is like, oh my God, what's wrong? Let me make you something else. Like, I didn't, don't eat it. Like, oh, please. And so that's the same thing that happens with, like, say, peanuts. You go to a restaurant and you're like, no, I can't have peanuts. I'm allergic. They're like, oh, excuse me, sir. Let me make sure that we don't have a single peanut even look cross-eyed at your food. But if you were to go to a restaurant and say, like, hey, I don't like peanuts, they're gross, they'd be like, kind of, the waiter would probably be nice because that's their job, but they'd be like internally kind of annoyed.
Right.
And so there's a certain power that being allergic to something has that not liking it doesn't have. And so I think this happened a lot with all the diet trends, the paleo people, the carnivore people, whatever. They like go to restaurants and then they say, I don't want this. And then people are like, what do you mean you don't want, like, you think you're so good? You think you're too good for these peanuts? Mm-hmm. You think you're too good for this, like, bread? Because it's a preference. There's a big preference, like there's a big difference between a preference and something that's like, forced. And our society, for better or worse, values, your circumstance or, your victimhood or whatever it is over your preference. And so the seed oil sensitivity is the point of that is to get at this idea that, like, hey, seed oil is like, no, I'm allergic. Because if I go to a restaurant, once again, I'm like, hey, no, I don't want seed oils. I don't like them. They're like, my friends or whoever's with it, like, you're too good for seed oils. Oh, like everyone else can poison themselves with seed oils, but you can't. Like, you don't like them. Who do you think you are? That kind of attitude. But if you say you can't eat them because you're allergic, no one questions that. So Definitely. The idea with seed oil sensitivity card specifically is like going to a restaurant, like, no, I actually can't eat these. Like, I'm basically allergic. Like, don't cook with them, please, because you'll cause my suffering, And the thing about seed oil sensitivity, though, that makes it different from every other, like, allergy is that everyone is basically seed oil sensitive, whereas not everyone is allergic to peanuts. Mm-hmm. And so if we brand the whole idea to the restaurants, to the waiters, to the chefs, whatever, is like this thing that we can't eat, just like gluten-free did, just like, peanuts and nuts did, just like shellfish did. I'm not saying that people aren't allergic to those things, they are. But because it was an allergy, all of a sudden those options are on every menu. Oh, I have a dairy allergy. Okay, dairy-free is on the menu. But if you show up saying, hey, I don't like seed oils, then they're like, well, get out, go somewhere else, So, but if we show up saying, I can't eat seed oils, then now it's on the menu because it's an allergy. So that's the idea with the seed oil sensitivity card. And I mean, to be fair, like, you're not going to go to a restaurant, especially like a sort of chain kind of restaurant where all the food comes from like somewhere else and it's not like individualized chefs individually making every meal. You'll only get so far. But if you go to a restaurant where like there's someone actually cooking the food, each dish is being prepared, then you can usually work something out with the chef that like doesn't involve seed oils.
Got it.
So that's how it should be used. You can't just like hand it to the guy at McDonald's. Like, it's not going to be.
It does seem like there's a positive reaction though happening in the world of food towards this idea of no seed oils. Like, there's restaurants now that are starting to think about it, right? Like, at least considering it.
Yeah.
And then there are new restaurant concepts like Ziki Kitchens who are starting to introduce no seed oils as like their main message. Yeah. And people are going to it just because they know there's no seed oils. So the message is working.
It's working. Yeah. And I think so. A lot of people will tend to think that, okay, yeah, restaurants will use something because it's cheaper. Like, seed oils are cheaper, right? Cool. Yeah, they want to save money. But they don't understand the flip side of it, which is that, like, you can charge a lot of money to me for butter. I'll pay way more than it costs you to use butter instead of seed oils. Like, so tallow is a good example. Tallow fried, whatever. Tallow is around 3 times more expensive than seed oils per amount or whatever. If I'm going to a restaurant like Dai Due or in Austin, shout out Dai Due, of course. And I'm going there to get their fries, I honestly don't care how much they cost. Like, if they want to charge me 5 times extra, or like, for the oil, or price it as if it's like 5 times the price or 10 times the price, like, I'm paying for it, So restaurants have to understand that people want to pay more for these things. And then the cost like kind of disappears as part of their equation. They're not going to lose money. Like if you're saying use tallow but don't change the price of French fries, then yeah, they're going to lose money. But if you're saying use tallow and the people who are buying your French fries will pay more for it, then they make even more money. So they're happier because it's a higher price food and their margins are probably going to be the same, but it's higher price, so they make more money on each batch of French fries. The only problem here is whether or not any given restaurant has enough volume of customers who care enough about that particular issue to pay the premium. And so the work that all of us do and everyone else who's involved in this, in educating people and getting people to have these preferences and then actually speaking, and that's like the other point of the seed oil card is so like chefs start to become aware of this. The more they hear requests for seed oils or whatever, the more they'll understand. And so the more they know that their own customers care, the more incentive they will have to then, use the higher priced ingredient because they understand that they can recoup their own costs. And so that's really the key here. It's not, some people like to think that the industry enjoys poisoning people. I mean, maybe some people are malicious here and there, but in general, the food industry like exists because people buy their products. And Brett, this is something I know you and I have talked about before. It's not that like the guys at Frito-Lay are sitting there like thinking, how can we make everyone obese or like how can we make them sick? People buy Doritos.
Yeah.
Like people take their own money that they earned and spend it on something that's poisonous to them. Like that's a thing that people do. And that's the thing that a lot of people do. Like Lay's alone, like the Lay's chips, not even all the Frito-Lay's companies, or brands, and they have a lot of them. Lay's alone is like sells 10 billion with a B dollars a year. So people collectively in the country are spending $10 billion a year on Lay's. And so all the companies with all of their money, the quote unquote big evil corporations who are poisoning us, how are they being funded? Are they being funded by some shadow government who's like here to make everyone fat? They're being funded by you. They're being funded by us. Well, not me or you guys, but they're being funded by everyone in the collective sense. And that's how they have their money. So they're going to do, like they're capitalist companies. They're going to do what sells. And so if seed oil potato chips didn't sell, then they would sell something else.
Yes.
But since seed oil potato chips do sell, and it works, it's a good business model for them, then they have no complaints. Because like, yeah, maybe you can say, oh, but they're not being good people, blah, blah, blah. But like, unfortunately, and for better or for worse, the way that capitalism is that money is what matters. And so companies do what makes money. So like, it's amoral in the sense that like, they don't have ethical values. They just have money as the value, which can be good because if people don't pay for bad things, then good things get produced. Mm-hmm. But if people pay for bad things, then bad things get produced. So like the existence of the food industry or whatever, and its current sorry state, is not really the sort of unidirectional imposition of a bunch of evil people against the poor, innocent, humanity. It's a two-way street. They are a reflection of us.
Definitely.
And I think that's very important for people to realize. And obviously it sounds like a big daunting task, but like the thing that you do in response to this is like, stop funding them.
Yes.
Right? If there's a political party you don't like, would you donate to them? No. But there's plenty of people that like hate Frito-Lay that literally give them money.
Yeah.
So why are you doing that?
Yeah. Stop that.
Yeah, stop.
Buy Masa.
Buy Masa.
Well,
Moral of the story, buy Masa.
yeah.
But you bring up a great point, though, we could dig into in terms of like the economics of running a truly healthy CPG company, not a greenwash CPG company, but a company that's really doing things the right way in terms of the ingredients you're choosing to source from. So just you alone with Masa saying, hey, we're going to cook with regenerative beef tallow as opposed to some cheap industrial oil that Lay's or Doritos is using, your cost of the oil alone is at least 3x, if not more than that. Yeah,
so the oil costs more, or the tallow costs more, but it's also like there's auxiliary costs that like it's harder to use. The way seed oils work in restaurants, I don't know if anyone's ever seen these things, but like they're literally seed oil tanker trucks that go around to the restaurants in like a given area or whatever, and it's like they look like the septic tank trucks, like with those tanks in the back, and they get the hoses out, and first of all, they drain out the old oil and they use it to go make biodiesel, and then they bring their like fire hose in and like fill up the fryers again, and then the seed oil truck goes and makes the rounds. Dude. So there's like certain infrastructure around like frying with seed oils that makes it a lot more convenient. But yeah, good ingredients are expensive, and so I think like our biggest complaint with Masa, of course, is that they're expensive, which yes, they are. The difference is not only that it has better ingredients though. The difference between us and say like Tostitos, which for context sells $1 billion a year, only a measly 1 billion compared to Lay's. They make food like can you imagine $1 billion worth of Tostitos? Like where would that even fit? Like would that fit?
Can't even imagine it.
Like it would flood the streets. Like I can't even imagine where you would put $1 billion worth of Tostitos.
How much do you think that weighs?
Well, I mean, we can do the math. I think that
You're gonna get like pretty close.
okay, Tostitos, if I'm correct, are like 20 cents an ounce or something, which is really, really cheap. Maybe let's be generous. They're 50 cents an ounce or whatever. And so how many dollars per pound? 50 times 16 is $8. So a pound is $8. So what's $1 billion divided by 8? $1 billion divided by 8. It's probably it's a little over 100 million pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100 million pounds of chips.
This is the benefit of having an engineer's brain on the podcast.
Yeah, like
Oh,
okay,
to
maybe
think
just
of us a long time.
120 million pounds. Anyway, that's a lot of chips. And people may be familiar with this concept from microeconomics called economies of scale, which basically says that the bigger you are, the cheaper per amount your stuff is. An easy explanation of this is that like, you know, when you buy products, when you buy even Masa chips, right? The bigger bag is cheaper because like more is put in one bag. And so like the cost of the bag is spread out over like more chips. So it's cheaper per ounce to buy a bigger bag. Or, you know, when you have a golf course, like you can afford to buy bigger lawnmowers because there's more land being mowed, you know, whatever. The bigger you are, the cheaper per acre it is to like mow your lawn, is what it is. This is why big companies like win, because of all the consumer sees is like the price of the item that they buy. The item that they're buying from a massive company is going to be cheaper than even the same item from a small company. So like even if we made Tostitos, like crappy, you know, canola corn chips, at the size at which we make Masa, they would still be like 3 to 4 times the price, maybe even higher than normal Tostitos, simply because we're small. Not even anything to do with the ingredients. So it's not just the ingredients, and I think people often think it's like the ingredient quality that's the only cost difference. It's not just the ingredients, it's the size. And of course, the only solution here is to get bigger. And then, but if you think about the criticism of, you know, a lot of people against the food companies, oh, these big food corporations. That's the criticism.
Yes.
So like you're criticizing them for being big, but then also criticizing the small people for being expensive. But like you can't have both.
Right.
It's either small and expensive or big and cheap. And there is no answer. There's literally no other way to do it. Because let's say if I have to hire if I have to hire like if I have to make a marketing campaign, I have to like make a bunch of TikToks or whatever. Maybe it costs me a few $1,000s for camera, actors, influencers, whatever. So a few $1,000s to make some TikTok videos relative to how much money we make is a lot more compared to a few $1,000s to make a TikTok compared to $1 billion of Tostitos. Like the cost of making a TikTok is the same whether I'm paying for it or Tostitos is paying for it. And because of that, like their revenues increase exponentially, but their costs like stay the same. And so they're better able to absorb that cost of making a bunch of TikTok videos. Maybe it's like if they were to spend $10,000 on a video campaign, the cost per bag of chips they sell is like probably a millionth of a cent of that marketing budget per bag of chips. Whereas for us, maybe it's an entire cent or 2 cents per bag of chips. I'm just pulling these numbers completely out of my ass. But the point is the same thing that they have to buy that we have to buy is spread out over more bags of chips for them. So it's a lot cheaper. So I think the issue with CPG companies, and this is seen time and time again, is that they start small and it's very good, and then they get bigger, and then, you know, it's better because the price goes down so they can attract more customers, so then they can get even bigger. And then they get really big, and then, you know, in order to keep growing and getting the price down even more, they sell to a big company. And then oftentimes that big company, not always, there's plenty of counterexamples of this, but oftentimes the big company is like, okay, cool. Well, let's make even more money by cutting the ingredients even further. Like Burt's Bees, good example. Van Man will, you know, tell you about that. So the issue here is that, if people want these high quality items and they want them to also be from like responsible companies that are run by like real people and not like shareholders, then they're going to be expensive, regardless of the ingredients. There's just no way around that. And then if they're going to ever be even close to price parity with something that's like the commodity version, it's going to have to be, the company's going to have to either get so huge on their own, or they're going to have to sell to some other big company which can operate it cheaper. Like another CPG example, like Frito-Lay has their own fleet of trucks. So for something like Masa or, even, Siete chips, for example, to be in stores, they have to go through a distributor. So Siete or Masa, whoever it is, we have to go through a distributor called UNFI or KeHE are the two big ones in like the sort of natural food space. And so those people come and pick up pallets of your products and they drive it all over to the Whole Foods or whatever grocery stores all over the country. You have to pay them to do that, obviously. And that cost has to get passed on to the customer. The thing is, you're paying them for the transportation, the fuel, all these other things, but you're also paying their own salaries, and you're also paying a premium because every company has to make a profit. But if I'm Frito-Lay, I own my own distribution. So I don't have to separate the profits from distribution from the profits from the food. Because I own everything, the profits filter both the profits filter up. So I don't have to pay for that premium on distribution because I own my own trucks,
Right.
So like it's things like that that are going to always make them be able to compete. And like another example is if we're on a store shelf, let's say we're in Whole Foods. Whole Foods will take 40 to like 45%, maybe 35 to 45%. That's just like for chips, that's what it'll be. And so when you pay your $10 worth of chips, $3.50 goes to Whole Foods. But Whole Foods doesn't sell Frito-Lay, so maybe it's a bad example, but whatever, ShopRite, Publix, pick your grocery store. Still, the 35%. Like the big snack companies like Frito-Lay have negotiated smaller margins with those stores so that when the customer buys $10 worth of chips, only $2 goes to the store itself. And so that means the price on the shelf is going to be a lot higher for the other random brand than it will be for Frito-Lay, because like the store has basically agreed that like, hey, we sell so much of your stuff, we'll make less per bag on your chips. And what that translates to is a lower per bag price to the customer. You ever go to Whole Foods and look at their chips? They have Siete chips. They don't have us yet, but they will. They have a whole bunch of brands. They also have their own like house-made brand. And the house-made brand is like organic corn, whatever, organic canola oil, hilarious. But they're really cheap. Why are they so cheap? Because Whole Foods doesn't need to charge, they don't need to mark up the price of their own product because they're profiting from the product anyway.
Yes.
Right. And so that's why they're so cheap. And once again, the customer doesn't know or really care because they just care about how much money is leaving their wallet. They don't necessarily like know or think or care about where the money is being distributed after that. And so all they see is a lower price on the shelf.
Right.
And so that's what they go for. And yeah, long story short, there are so many like advantages that come with being as big as one of these people that anyone who's small will never be able to compete with unless they literally get bought by that company or grow so big as like Frito-Lay would. However, that's very difficult and it would take a long time, but even still, it's not even an issue of time and like it's an issue of total amount of customers. Like however many Twitter threads we post, we're probably not for any, not in the near future ever going to have as many people who eat the way that we do compared to people that eat, the McDonald's Frito-Lay version.
Yes.
And so they're always going to be able to be bigger, and the bigger they are, the cheaper it's going to be to run their business. I think the only antidote to this, or the piece of good news I'll say in all of this, is that there have been a few good examples of like premium CPG companies that have, sold their brands to large conglomerates and preserved the recipes.
Mm-hmm.
Like two notable ones that come to mind are Epic Foods and Primal Kitchen.
Yep.
From what I understand, the supply chains, the recipes, everything is like the same and like good. And guess what? The minute that Kraft bought Primal Kitchen, the price on the shelves could go down. Probably, I wasn't there. I wasn't paying attention to this at the time. I'm sure it could have gone down. Maybe they didn't do it, right? Because they don't need to. They could have just skimmed that extra off the top for themselves. But the efficiencies that they would have gained in that business from buying Primal Kitchen easily could have lowered the price 20 to 30%.
Right.
and not because they changed the recipe, just because all the other things that they have an advantage on. And I think if people have prices that are only concern, then that's what the market's going to do. But if people don't have that as their only concern, then you're going to be able to see the existence and the steady state long-term existence of these sort of premium brands being able to operate as independent entities.
The economies of scale in food seems to be at the center of the problem of this race to the bottom when it comes to quality, where it's like everything that's in your cost structure needs to be reduced. Like let's lower the cost of it and make it cheaper.
Yeah.
Which when you're looking at it, numbers on a sheet, that's great. But when you're talking about actual inputs to food products that people are going to be consuming, maybe it's not that good.
No, it's not that good. But like the silver lining is that there's a lot of things that go into the cost of food that aren't the ingredients. So, for example, like labor or like, the factories, the machinery,
marketing,
HR, having a CFO, your finance department, your auditing, your your bookkeeping. So many of those things benefit from economies of scale, and they're not the ingredients. So if we think about like growing Masa, I don't have to touch the quality of the ingredients. I can literally have a giant tortilla chip production line as big as one that Frito-Lay uses, provided there's demand enough. I can use the same machinery that they use. I can have my own trucks. I can have all the same things that they do, just with our ingredients.
Right.
And so there's a lot of room for cost improvement as you grow. That aren't just merely cutting the ingredient quality. And I mean, the examples like we just said, Epic and Primal Kitchen are probably good examples of that.
I think there was something in the contract when they sold that says that they can't tamper with the recipe for like 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
For Primal Kitchen.
I think for Primal Kitchen.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a cool provision. I mean, it's great. I'm not going to complain about this at all. I think it's just like kind of superfluous because if you're a big company, you're buying a brand, you're buying it because people like it. They like it for what it is.
Yes.
Obviously they don't care about if it's, Kraft's trucks or someone else's trucks delivering it. They don't care about those things, but they care about what's in the bottle. And so if you're buying an asset, it's like, why would you buy a house and then like pour water on the wood floors and let it rot?
Right.
Why would you, get wood floors and like walk around with your like pointy heel, like high heels and like get little divots in the floor, whatever, what it is. You're not going to buy an asset and then like decrease its value, or at least it would be silly to.
Right.
I'm not going to put it past these people because a lot of the people who run the brand, like the brand managers of these companies, don't necessarily like know what they're doing in this way, or they don't necessarily fully understand their customer, and they're so detached from them that doesn't really matter. Especially the big companies in food in the past few decades, like food has become a commodity, and like the sort of tribalism we see nowadays with like this diet eats this kind of brand, and the sort of associations where people really care about it, that wasn't really a thing like 30 years ago. So I mean, maybe brand managers are waking up to it now, but the point is like they would be making a mistake if they were to change the ingredient quality for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the brand is just, okay, maybe people won't realize it for a few months, but eventually they will, and they'll start buying the new startups, food.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you've learned from starting Masa that you wish you had known at the onset?
It's a good question. I mean, it's probably not a satisfying answer, but honestly, everything that I've like needed to learn like has been perfectly well timed. Like I learned everything as like I need to go. That's a great question. I think probably like knowing more about marketing ahead of time would have been helpful. Like knowing how Facebook ads work and how Google ads work and how influencer relationships work. That would have been something useful to know ahead of time. I think a bit of a better understanding of the actual like, scaled production economics of it would have been helpful. But honestly, like the thing, it's like, as you level up or whatever, it's like like in video games, the skills that you need to beat the boss, like conveniently come right before the boss. And obviously a video game is designed by someone, but like, in a sense, that's exactly how I feel now too. Like the things that I need to like beat the next level of the boss are things that come to me as I need them.
Right.
Which is pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful to people, but that's how I feel about it.
No, it's a great answer. And I think also something that we'd love to talk to you about is we were talking about the parallels that that we had of like both working corporate jobs, choosing to write Twitter threads and eventually quit and go all in on these businesses, which is hysterical. But I think the concept, the concept of bootstrapping a business and going all in and going 0 to 1 as an entrepreneur and sleeping on the couch and grinding it out is almost like overly romanticized. Sure. Especially when you're an engineer at a FANG company making an incredible salary, actually foregoing that to build something from scratch. So I was just wondering if you could maybe share your thought process behind leaving that job to actually go all in on Masa, and just if you have any advice for someone that's a future or aspiring creator that wants to do the same thing, but they're scared.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I have like a number of thoughts that are potentially self-contradictory about this.
Love it.
But okay, one thing is that a lot of people will say, start a side hustle and then, let it grow as you have your main hustle, your job, your day job. And then once your salary from your side hustle equals the salary you get from your day job or whatever, then you quit and do that full time. I mean, I think that's prudent, but I also think that's BS.
Is that even possible?
Like,
It's possible. But
I don't know of any entrepreneurs of any renown. I'm sure there are like, sort of middle tier stories, but I don't know of any, the classics like the Steve Jobses, the Jeff Bezoses of the world. They just did it. Yeah. They were just like, all right, I'm quitting. Like, I'm doing this. I mean, yeah, you should do your research and like have a plan and like evaluate to make sure that that's actually viable. You should, make sure that your product is differentiated enough and that you have at least, you can learn the skills that are needed and you can obtain at least the outside assistance that you need, but you just got to go for it. Like, I think there's a lot of people will apply too much data and like thinking and like rationalization to a creative process, which it can't be applied to. If you're going to be an accountant or if you're going to be an investor, or basically in every other area of life, like diversification, data, smoothing out the variance, like all of those things that like limit risk are good. But the only way you succeed as an entrepreneur is risk. Like, limiting risk is all about reducing downside, but the part of that equation that everyone forgets is that you also limit the upside in the equivalent way. If people are watching this on YouTube, whatever, take another wave example, right? You're like putting a concrete floor so the waves can't go past a certain point, but you're also putting a little ceiling on the waves so they can't go beyond a certain point.
Yes.
And so all you're after in entrepreneurship is the upside, like the huge upside. So like, why would you put a ceiling over it? And the only way to not have the ceiling is to like not put any risk limitation on your outcome. So I think you should basically just go for it. However, that being said, I think there's a lot of people who try to start companies and fail. And so you should be very sure that you're not going to be one of those before you go and do it. And I don't like, there's a certain romanticization of like quitting your job and going to be an entrepreneur, but everyone romanticizes that once the thing is succeeded. They don't romanticize it like before then. They don't romanticize where it didn't work and then, you're unemployed and whatever. They romanticize it after it's won. And so I think, the same thing people say averages, a certain percent of businesses fail. Like, if you think in that way, you're going to be limited because like you should be thinking, well, why I'm not one of those percentage of businesses that fail. Everyone says 60% of restaurants fail. Yeah, but I'm one of the 40% that didn't. And here's why. Like, you have to have an answer to that question. And so like thinking in like averages, like waking up every day and be like, oh my God, I have a 40% chance of succeeding. Like, no. You should have like 100% chance of succeeding in your head. I think there's a good analogy here with like motorcycle accidents, and they talk about like the death rate of motorcycle accidents compared to car accidents. Yes, people die when driving motorcycles. They get into accidents. But how many of those people who got into motorcycle accidents were wearing full protective gear? The helmet, the gloves, the jacket, the Kevlar pants, like the boots. How many of them were not drunk? How many of them were not speeding? If you take away all those factors, then all of a sudden your chance of dying in a motorcycle accident is like the same as a normal car, So you have to be looking for why you're not going to fail and like taking the protective measures in all aspects of your business. And so a lot of stars have to align for it to work, but you also have the ability to manipulate them into alignment. For example, I think something that people have really commented on with Masa is the design. like not the food, but the design, the aesthetic, the vibe, the Instagram, all that stuff. And that's something that we obviously have complete control over. You know, we don't have control over whether people will see our ads or you know, their behavior and blah, 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 but we do have control over how we design and present our product. And so doing it the way that we did sort of like, I wouldn't say eliminates, but it really reduced a lot of the sort of brand risk that you might have starting a healthy company. So that's like, you know, one area of it. Having, you know, the social media platform ahead of time was also, for me, super helpful, because not only did I have my platform, I had enough friends and associates and acquaintances from the internet that could also like promote it, which like gave it a good boost. There's a lot of like sort of business sophistication that you have to know that I think I knew because I had been, you know, surrounded by friends who have startups or VCs or work at VCs. That's just like, you know, the tech world that I was sort of in. So like I knew a lot about how raising money works, about how even taxes work and filing corporation stuff. A lot of things that take a lot of time to learn, and that people, like if you don't figure it out or don't know what you're doing, can like really like get screwed up.
Yes.
So there's a lot of pitfalls. Yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls. And so you want to make sure that you have an answer to all of them. And even knowing what pitfalls there are is like kind of hard. So I think, yeah, on the one sense, like, yeah, you should just rip it, quit your job and go do it. But on the other hand, you need a lot of things to align, and you need to make your life as easy as possible. And there are a lot of people that I see doing things that are not easy, and they're making their lives really hard. And I look at that and I'm like, damn, that's tough. Like, good luck. I mean, I respect it. Like, if they're doing something that's like worthwhile, like, good job on the hustle. But like, it's like doing it's hard enough. Why make it harder? And so things like the advanced knowledge of like how the whole industry works, having your connections in place, having good branding design, having plans, knowing the risks, like talking to other people who've done it. Like, I didn't know anything about CPG, but I was able to like learn enough about the pitfalls common to this industry to like be able to at least minimize many of them. So doing all of your homework ahead of time is good. And also, I think the last thing that I want to say about this is like, you can't do something that someone else is doing. I mean, you can, but your life is going to be miserable. It's going to be hard. It'll be an uphill battle. And even if you
what do you mean by that?
Like, the only reason why, based on what you were saying before about how existing companies are cheaper, the only reason why you'll ever do something and like win when you're more expensive and smaller than anyone else is because what you're doing is so different and unique.
Got it.
Like, don't start a search engine. Google exists, you know? But, I mean, OpenAI, ChatGPT is a common thing nowadays. I'm sure people are familiar with this. Like, anyone who wanted to start a search engine to beat Google is going to lose. But if you start something unique that no one else is doing, which is like a chatbot that actually works because it's got like very good AI inside of it, that's something that like can beat Google in the sense that when I have a question, I go to ChatGPT and I don't go to Google. You know, that's something that like came out of nowhere. And the only reason that they are able to like, and they haven't beaten them yet at this, but like, I think they ultimately will. The only reason they can do that is because they're different. And so there's a lot of, I think that there's a lot of supplements are a good example. Like, yeah, you can make a good amount of money, like selling a supplement brand that's like your own brand, blah, blah, blah. But like every supplement out there exists. They all exist. Like, I don't care what it is. They're all there. There's a million companies that do it. And so if you're just going to come out with, for example, liver pills, yet another liver pill, like, yeah, Ancestral Supplements did it and they kicked ass. But everyone else who has an incremental liver pill is like never going to capture any appreciable percentage of that upside because they're doing something that someone else has already done.
Totally.
But if you were to like, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, if you were to come up with some like new organ delivery mechanism, you know, or like some other way of getting organs, well, maybe you guys have an idea about that, but I don't know if you want to talk about it. But if you were to come up with some other novel way of doing that, then it's cool. Then now we can work here. Tortilla chips are a great example. Like, that category is completely saturated. Completely saturated. Like, go to like the number of different brands of chips that are all the same that you can go to and buy in any store is enormous. You know, it's all, they got organic corn, non-organic corn, canola oil, non-organic canola oil. You know, they got this salt, that flavor, whatever, but there's like dozens, maybe even hundreds of brands that all do the same thing. So then it's like, okay, how can you go and compete with that? I'm not saying don't do something similar to what other people are doing, because almost everything is something similar.
Yeah.
We still have a tortilla chip, and we only changed one ingredient. Every other good corn chip is organic corn. They all have sea salt, whatever. We only changed one ingredient, but that one ingredient is like a massive distinction. And not only that, we brand it in a way that's like appealing. Going back to what we said with junk food before, like the Masa goal here, and one of the things I think we're well positioned to do is like physically embody the idea that like health food is enjoyable by the aesthetic of it. Like there's a world in which we could have made Masa sort of like a carnivore caveman kind of, health nut brand, or we could have made it like a sort of hippie, whatever healthy thing. But that's imagery that people associate with like weird health food.
Yes.
And so if we were to show up and say, hey, here's our health food and here's our branding that is something that you've seen in other weird health foods before, we're going to be like, oh, that's another weird health food. Let me not buy that. So we had to come up with an idea that like makes it not only normal, but like very alluring and like appealing to the normal person, which I think we've done successfully. And that embodies the whole philosophy in it. So it's not just about the product on the bag. And I think, this also speaks to a lot of very practically minded people, no offense to them, engineers often, people like myself probably 10 years ago or something, where it's like, oh, marketing is BS. We don't need marketing or branding. We don't need any of that. We don't, it's just the product alone is all that matters. No, absolutely not. And I think people in the health world are like uniquely susceptible to that sort of thinking based on what I've seen. And so that would be another word of caution. It very, very, very much matters how it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget that basically. Don't miss that. But I think, I don't know if I missed any train of thought.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And I think for anyone who's listening, who's thinking about starting a company, tons of great advice in there. I think the first part is really interesting to me, where it's this idea of how you make decisions is really based on your circumstances. So if you're, you have a side hustle and a job, you're not going to make the same decisions that you make as if you were fully committed to the actual business that you're trying to build. So in that sense, like those are two totally different people. Like if you have person A who's totally committed, making decisions that are essentially life or death, right? Like this business dies if I make the wrong choices consecutively enough, or the person who, they're willing to just like float themselves through a paycheck.
Right.
Like those people are just making different decisions.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, those compounded decisions will catch up to person A, person B.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, like starting a business is hard, right? So don't make it even harder than it has to be.
Yeah.
If you have another job, you're making it harder than it has to be because you're distracted.
Right.
Like I was fortunate that my job that I had before this required me to work, like 5 to 10 hours a week remotely, didn't do anything basically. But it was still like so psychologically burdensome that even with such small quantity of work, I wasn't able to do both at the same time.
Yes.
And if I had continued to have the job, past a certain point, like I would be making life in Masa harder for myself. And, people are also like, okay, I like my paycheck, but yeah, that's what you have now, but you'll still have that in 10 years if that's all you do. But if you do something else and you actually win, then you'll be in an entirely different world.
Yeah.
And so that upside, once again, is what you should be trying to maximize and like not so much thinking in the short term.
Such good advice. Yeah, it's definitely not black and white. There's definitely some gray there to it. So it sounds like for you, being an entrepreneur, you're allowed to maximize your upside. You have to pull the ripcord, be thoughtful, be intentional about it. It sounds like regardless of what you thought about your old company, it did give you the flexibility to be able to start Masa. Yeah. You have a great partner, and you guys have really been intentional about the branding. So, I mean, look, man, we're so pumped to be affiliated with you and getting to know you better as a friend and inspired by all the work that you're doing in the space. And I can't wait to see everything that you go on to do when we meet up for Force of Nature Part 3 next year for our next reunion.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
It actually might be cool to do a podcast.
We should do
to
it.
see where the difference is.
The next year check in. Yeah. We'll be. Yeah, things are gonna be definitely different. It's cool. No, I'm very hopeful for the new generation of like health. I think for many years, decades even, like people were talking about, a very small number of people were talking about raw milk and organ meats in like the early 2000s, and now it's like really becoming mainstream. And I think I credit two things with it, of course, time, but also like the actual effort from people like you guys, like youthful, energetic, intelligent people who are actually doing things and promoting it in a way that's like, oh, I want to be like those guys. Like, yeah, that's great. that is how we win, not being like, oh, health is weird, come join us. No,
Yeah.
it's like normal because this is how our bodies are meant to exist. So showing that is important. But then also this idea that like the quality and like the unity of everything is what matters. And it's not like this sort of weird categories, like the relationship between the environment, which people care about. We don't need to go into that, but the environment and good food, you know, to kill two birds in one stone. And then of course people are always interested in beauty. Well, guess what? You look better if you're healthy.
Yeah.
And so instead of, you know, resorting to surgeries or other weird chemicals, you get that as well. So it's like that unity of all these good things in a little bundle as represented by people who have those things and then can talk about it cogently. I think that's really powerful. And yeah, I think we're finally, this generation of health people, because there's been many, is finally going to be able to make an actual like tangible difference in like normal people's lives. So it's cool.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. Well, Steven, congrats on all the success. We're pumped for everything that you're doing, and just looking forward to staying in touch and continuing to just fight the good fight together.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, guys. I appreciate everything you do too. It's been a fun conversation. Awesome. Can't wait till next time.
Thanks, brother.
Boom.